now I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. We have State Assembly Member David Chiu, who represents the 17th District in Eastern San Francisco. Welcome him. We have Sam Dodge, the Deputy Director of the City's Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. And right to my right is Joe Wilson, the Executive Director of Hospitality House. Next up is Kelly Cutler, Human Rights Organizer with the Coalition on Homelessness. And Leon Winston, the CEO of Swords to Plowshares. Welcome him. And last but not least, Sherilyn Adams, the Executive Director at Larkin Street Youth Services. Welcome them all, everyone. Okay, so let's get started. Let me get my questions here. And make sure you have your notes too for the questions that you have for the panelists. Okay, so question number one. What are the root causes for people experiencing homelessness? Who would like to go first? Looks like Sam wants to say something. And you want to hold it like this. It's kind of
okay. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for having me here. It's a really awesome panel. And, you know, as we heard here, everyone has a unique story. There's no way to kind of bucket everyone's life into simple cliches. But, you know, homelessness is, I think, a good descriptor of the problems we're talking about. It's a lack of housing. And I divide a home into both a social space and a physical space. And it's affordability that's at the heart of it. And, you know, we know many countries in the world do not have rampant homelessness. And they are very racist. They have huge substance abuse problems, mental health crises. But that does not result in massive amounts of people sleeping under freeways and tents like we have here in California in the United States. It is really the lack of social housing, which, you know, public housing, and there's been an 80% reduction in federal expenditures on affordable housing since the late 70s. And as it first started to hit, cities had to open massive shelters all across the country. There's been many subsequent efforts, and there's many things that also are like intersectionally related to homelessness. We know that there's overlaps with racism. There's just a far overrepresentation of African Americans in our homeless population. We know that there's intersections with domestic violence. We know that there's a lot of intersections, things that come out and are expressed in homelessness, but the root cause is the lack of affordable housing.
Can I add to that?
So this is, I work at Larkin Street Youth Services, so we work with young people, and I think for young people, a part of the drivers into homelessness, primary drivers for young people are family conflict or being forced out of their home, kicked out of their homes, or communities that are not safe around their LGBTQ status. In addition, it's exits out of systems of care without proper transition planning, whether that's foster care, juvenile justice, or mental health. Increasingly, it's some of the issues that Sam also talked about, so affordability, unemployment or lack of employment, and so young people who can't, especially in the city, obviously, who can't participate in getting into housing because they don't have jobs or jobs that have sufficient income. So we do see the intersections that Sam's talking about, but I think for some populations of homelessness, there's additional drivers for them.
Well, I think it's important not to shy away from just the inequity that's a part of our economic system. I mean, I think it's hard to talk about poverty and homelessness without talking about the economic system that drives it. I think it's also important to be able to say what homelessness is not. It's not typically a product of behavioral pathology. It is, poverty and homelessness are economic conditions that have economic roots and they have economic solutions. And for our economic system, capitalism, which exists in large part on like fewer people having more than they need and far too many people having far less than they need. It should be no surprise to anyone that we have a condition of homelessness that seems rather intractable alongside of the absence of a political will to really grapple with the fundamental inequity that's a part of our economic system. And so I think it's important for localities like San Francisco to move away from the public frame that insists on there's something wrong with these people, that if we could only fix them, we would fix the problem of homelessness. That gets us away from the fundamental issues of race, class, sex that are factored into economic inequity across this society.
Hi, I'm Leon. I work for Swords to Plowshares. We're a veterans organization, and one of our maintenance of our mission is to end poverty and homelessness among veterans. And I agree with everything that's said here. And I think you need to differentiate between the visible face of homelessness, which are people that have spiraled down to the condition that you saw in this film, and the many thousands of people that go homeless on an episodic basis every year. And where we have failed those who have mental health issues, who have histories of trauma, is we're leaving them on that street and they're re-experiencing that trauma, and everything gets more entrenched, much harder to deal with. It's when we're able to get them housed, it's, for many of these individuals, it's the work that starts there. As Margot Antonetti was saying in the film, the work just starts there. These people have been on the streets for years and years and years. All of a sudden, they're in housing. If they're in an SRO, which is often the only stock we have for the homeless population in San Francisco, then they're isolated in four walls. Their community was on the streets outside of it. We really have to work very hard with trauma-informed care to work with them and build trust. But also, we need to work with them to create community so they can be brought back into community. It's about a readjustment to being housed and to being in community and to trust. And so it's much more complex than any one thing, but I certainly agree the basis of it is socioeconomic, and always has been.
All of the above. I want to thank all of you for being part of this discussion of how we dive deeper into solving homelessness, because it's very easy in the political space to try to boil homelessness into a soundbite. And we could probably take a week and each of us could spend hours talking about each of these issues. For me, I think all of you have touched upon it. We're in the midst of the most intense housing crisis we've ever experienced, and there are many reasons for that. But simply as Sam put it, putting a roof over everyone's head and understanding that housing should be a right is a challenge. I would also point to laws that make it easy to evict people, an entire structure around the tenant-landlord relationship. For those of you who have not had a chance to read the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond, I highly recommend it. And it really lays out that what we think of people being unable to pay the rent is really a structure of inequality, of laws being stacked against them, which leads to something that I think was just mentioned around income inequality. The fact of the matter is, California, for example, we are the 6th largest economy in the world. We are larger than all countries except for 5 others, and yet we have the highest poverty rate in the United States when you include housing costs. Just think about that for a moment. And then, and it's been alluded to before, a broken healthcare system that doesn't address the healthcare needs broadly defined, whether they be mental health or addiction or physical health issues that cause situations to become exacerbated until someone's out on the streets. Each of those things that I just laid out for 20 seconds, we could spend 3 hours to do, but they're all interrelated, and oftentimes we don't have a chance to unpack that.
Thank you so much. My next question is kind of directed towards Kelly, and we had this email discussion about this. Some critics say that giving money directly to the homeless is a form of enabling. And so what are some of the alternatives to giving money to people living on the street? I know you said that, giving people money directly does help them. So what are some of why do you think that? And then what are some of the alternatives from everyone?
Yeah, the one question the one question people ask me is it a good or a bad thing to give someone money on the streets? And everyone wants the answer to that, and I don't have the answer. It's not a yes or a no. I think it's a individual decision to do that, a choice to do that if you're able to. I look at that and I think of it in a few different ways. One of them is that when you're giving something, if you're giving a gift to someone, you're giving it. And so, another way is that people need a lot of other things that you may not think of that requires money. One of the big topics that comes up is like with tampons for women can often be challenging. There's a lot of different things that people need. With that, it is your decision if you're going to give or not, but the one thing I do really encourage people to do, and I see as the most important thing, is if you're giving money or not, is to see someone's humanity, to at least acknowledge someone, to, even if you can't, I work with the Coalition on Homelessness. I don't have money to give a lot of people. But I'll ask, how someone's doing, or even just smiling. As I walk through the TL, I'm constantly being thanked for my smile. And it's just a simple thing. And so, that's something that often comes up with the money thing, and they say, maybe others will have some other suggestions, but it's not a bad thing to be giving people money, because sometimes that's just what they need.
Well, I think that, thinking about that question, right? So in the 1600s in England, there was something called the Elizabethan Poor Laws. And the context was that the giving of alms directly to the poor was a practice to be discouraged. Right? This is 400 plus years ago. And the construct of the deserving poor versus undeserving poor, the belief that the care of vagrants was a local responsibility, meaning that you didn't want other people, other vagrants coming to your town to benefit from the generosity of that townspeople. So I think for me, it's really getting at the core of what our humanity is, what kind of society we pretend to be, and the society that we are. I agree wholeheartedly with Kelly that if you're giving a gift, there is no expectation from the gift other than that you're giving it. That's one. This whole notion that money is somehow harmful for poor people really is, I think, at the root of what our collective problem is. It's like money's great for rich people, but somehow it's harmful for poor people. That's really getting at the core of our own hypocrisy, our own contradiction, our own schizophrenia about dealing with poverty and homelessness in our midst. And it requires us really to dig deeper into what it means to be human. Thinking about our own struggles. I'm the executive director of a $4.5 million organization. 32 years ago, I was sleeping in that organization's shelter. So I have to think very practically about the notion of reconnecting the individual back to the community and then building a community around each individual. This community itself, the so-called Western addition, is still struggling with the scars of redevelopment, right? For someone else imposing what their community needs to be defined as. We have in our economic system, decades of redlining, where certain people weren't welcome in certain communities, and we would construct our economic system to ensure that result. We have a foreclosure crisis that we're still reeling from that resulted in a wholesale transfer of assets from one people, like middle class and poor people, to the wealthy. Those things don't happen overnight, and they're not resolved overnight. And I think for many of us who are on this side of the table, it isn't so much why can't we move the needle given how much money we're spending? I'll give you a couple of examples. 5 corporations in San Francisco had profits of $33 billion last year. $33 billion. We spend they make in profits in 4.5 days what we spend an entire year on homelessness. Right? So think about that for a moment. One nuclear submarine in our defense arsenal costs $3 billion. For $3 billion, you could give virtually every homeless person in San Francisco a $500,000 home for the cost of one nuclear submarine. We have 18 nuclear submarines in our defense arsenal. So government at any level is about making choices, right? It's about deciding to do this and not that. So hopefully in the best of circumstances at this level, for us, we refuse not to be human with each other. That is a choice we can all make.
Very well said, Joe. And this is my next question for David. You are obviously very involved in the legislative process on homelessness and on other major issues. I just wanted to know, how is California addressing this crisis? What is the latest kind of policy, any kind of a legislative movement that people need to know about? In kind of a layman's terms, if you can do that, thank you.
Let me think about how to sum that up in 2 minutes. I want to build on something that Joe said and tie the last 2 questions together, because I often find that this question of should you give $1 to the homeless person on the street to be an incredible distraction from the big picture of what we're talking about. Because while people are trying to decide what to do with their quarters, there are billions and billions of dollars of decisions that are being made that no one is focused on that is creating the systemic root of the problem. So, for example, when I'm asked about the housing crisis, how do we get here? I say, well, before the Great Recession, we used to invest about $2 billion a year as a state, every year, in building affordable housing. I think many of you know this. That money dried up, and we're now, 8-9 years later, close to $20 billion in a hole that we haven't invested. And you asked the question what we're doing in the legislature at this moment. I'm leading the fight to try to figure out how to get that funding back. But in order for us to achieve that, I need a 2/3 vote, because that's what it takes under our California Constitution to pass new revenue measures. And literally at this moment, we are some votes short of that 2/3 vote, and I have literally 6 more legislative days this year to get this done. We have a multi-billion-dollar package we're trying to move forward with a good chunk of that money that could go to homeless organizations and city departments that are doing that, but we're not going to get it done if we can't move this. And speaking of another big conversation, in national housing policy, we often talk about the American dream of home ownership, of being something good. There's been a policy that's been viewed for a really long time to promote home ownership. It's called the mortgage interest deduction. For those of you who don't know, the mortgage interest deduction, if you have the opportunity to own your home, is supposed to give you a tax break to allow you to own your home. It turns out that that tax break is only used by people who make 6 figures. 80% of Americans who get to benefit from this tax break make over $100,000 a year. If I were to ask you, how much does California lose every year because of this incredibly highly regressive mortgage interest tax policy? Sam, do you know the answer to that? $10.7 billion a year. When I proposed earlier this year that we phase out the fourth mortgage interest deduction for individuals who own a second home simply for vacation purposes. Any of you own a second home in California that you don't rent out, that you simply have for vacation purposes? My guess is no one here does. We lose $300 million a year just on that piece alone. And yet I could not get even half of my colleagues in the legislature to support the idea that rather than spending money for a tiny percentage of Californians to have 2 roofs over their head so they can have a vacation home, let's take that money to put 1 roof over someone's head. I couldn't get a majority vote on that. How do we address that? We have to keep building the movement. This is where Organizing for America comes in. And by the way, when I see OFA, I'm so sad. Because OFA represents sort of this incredible hope of what the last president was about compared to what this current president is doing. But I look at that and we all see hope too, because we have to keep building this movement. We're not going to be able to get through this dark time if we don't all work together, figure this out, and start organizing.
Amen.
Were there any questions from the audience? Okay, so this is from Bill Goodwin, board chair and founder of the Student Mentor Project. He says billions of dollars, state, federal, local, and private, are being spent every year onto today's homeless population? Okay, on today's homeless population. What is being done to reduce the future generations of homeless, and including at-risk youth?
That's a great question. So I think there's a number of things that are being done and can be done to prevent homelessness, right? We know that 50% of the adult homeless population experienced homelessness when they were younger. So certainly by preventing youth and family homelessness, by addressing system change issues, by ensuring that all young people have access to education and employment, by improving school outcomes for everybody, not just some youth, so that Black and brown youth have the same outcomes, the same opportunities, and the same supports in school and post schools, to have access to education, employment, and housing, by addressing system issues that are disproportionately, obviously African American and Latino youth are disproportionately represented in systems of care. So as we can improve those systems, as we improve transitions, as we improve access to higher education, those are ways that we can reduce the homelessness population. By increasing family supports, by reducing the number of kids who drop out of school, all of those are ways in which we can reduce the number of young people who experience homelessness, and ultimately reducing the number of homeless adults.
Well, I think, creating opportunities for young people, looking at the intersect of race and class in our education system, looking at the overrepresentation of Black and brown children in special education, looking at the overrepresentation of Black and brown children in the criminal justice population, looking at the incredible disparity between the wealthiest schools versus the poorest schools. The top 10 private secondary schools in this country collectively have an endowment of $7 billion. 10 schools, 10. You would have to have 1,700 public schools to get to that number of $7 billion. In Venezuela, a country that's struggling these days with its own political crisis, they have a music program called El Sistema, where the idea is that every middle school child gets a musical instrument. A graduate of that system, Gustavo Dudamel, is the director of the Los Angeles Philharmonic. He has brought that concept to America. I would answer the question by saying that maybe at least one of the visions for this country ought to be that every child in this country has a musical instrument. Every child has a paintbrush. No child goes to bed at night without a hand to hold or a book to read. That is a vision worth striving for.
Briefly. As well as preventing the front door to homelessness being opened to begin with, as Sherilyn and Joe were saying, we can also utilize resources more effectively. During the stimulus package, there was a program that HUD put out, the Obama administration, homeless prevention and rehousing program. It was very effective. The rapid rehousing part of that in particular, it's designed to, someone's becoming homeless, they have an eviction notice, they're about to become homeless, they can't get to work, their car's broken down, temporary financial assistance. Thankfully, the VA copied that program. We operate one in San Francisco and one in Oakland. We've helped, for the last 5 years, several thousand veterans and their families avoid becoming homeless, or if they have become homeless, a very quick remedy to that. And it's very cost effective, and it's something we should be doing across the board.
Sorry. And I think it's important to note when we're talking about prevention and things on the good news side is that San Francisco did receive funding to be one of the 10 demonstration projects from HUD that really is about developing a system to prevent and end youth homelessness. And so when we think about ways in which we are doing positive things in the city and working towards solutions, we are working at a systemic level to do prevention around young people, to better and more quickly respond to families and other folks who are experiencing homelessness, so that the more rapidly we can respond, then those folks that then we have the right interventions matched, then we're able to prevent longer term homelessness.
I'm going to add just three quick things. First, when we spend $65,000 a year to put a prison roof over some kid's head, when we could be spending $17,000, $18,000 a year for supportive housing, books, not bars. Clear, but we still keep doing it. Secondly, I have recently, this past couple of years, been saying that the newest face of homelessness is not who you think. It's college students. There are studies that show 1 out of 10 Cal State University students around the state of California are sleeping on their friends' couches, taking showers in the university gyms, sleeping in their cars, and often dropping out of school. And I had a bill this year that got through 3 committees and an assembly floor vote and just died last week that would have established an emergency financial aid program to help prevent a student, if they're about to get evicted or they don't have that month's rent, from losing their home. We're still trying to build political support for this idea of those numbers being a reality. Third thing I'll say is, as a city, we have to, again, not just put our money where our mouth is, but understand that there, but for the grace of God, could go us. And we have to think about how to build facilities that integrate in all our communities. I see my friend Sherilyn sitting a couple seats for me. A number of years back, you got me into trouble with a certain neighborhood in the Marina because we collectively dared proposing a 24-unit building called Edward II for transitional age youth in the Marina, heaven forbid. And unfortunately, the neighborhoods around that opposed us tooth and nail, but we were successful, and that project has been an amazing success. And those are the sorts of things that we have to figure out how to do in one of the wealthiest cities in the world.
Great, thank you. We do have just a few minutes left. I do want to get some more questions in from the audience. This is from, it's anonymous actually. What strategies are other cities, states, or countries using to address homelessness that you think could work for us, the Bay Area, California?
So there's a lot of strategies that are working out there. What Leon was mentioning about sort of lighter touch intervention for people that are newly homeless or people that just need some time-limited assistance to get back into housing, called rapid rehousing. and paired together with supportive housing for people experiencing long-term homelessness or multiple kind of crises in their life. That combination has worked nationally to reduce veterans' homelessness by a dramatic amount, and almost 50% now. And it can work on all populations. So, also many communities that seem to be having some success with their reducing and ending homelessness also have an ability to open up sufficient shelters and emergency services for those experiencing homelessness. That's a very important and difficult priority, like we were saying. The community acceptance, the othering of homelessness, and the fear of services is something that San Francisco has not gotten over.
Well, we could certainly organize together to get a sales tax passed here to get more revenue. We can't get there without more money. The city of Los Angeles was able to do it. We should be able to do it here. There are a couple of things that we should not be doing. We should not be spending more and more money on the enforcement end, $20 million plus on enforcement interventions that don't work instead of providing housing subsidies for 1,300 families that would, reduce the homeless family population by 70%. We should not be investing any of our local assets into prison privatization. We have one of the 4 largest prison privatization firms in the world that has set up shop in San Francisco, blocks from here. We have a facility run by GeoCare, which puts San Quentin on our block. Their business model is locking up black and brown people. We should not be providing any space at all for that organization, for that profit-making venture to feed off of our people. I'm going to gently nudge our assembly member to look at what's possible at the state level, to investigate their state contract, and to make sure that no local assets benefit that profit-making corporation, and also look at the rationale of keeping people housed, right? And yes, that's an ongoing expense, but at least we managed to close the barn door. We don't add to the homeless population. A tax on pied-à-terres, the vacation residences. Vancouver was able to do it. We ought to be able to do something like that here. There are a number of options to grow the pie with more dough to tackle the problem.
I'll mention 2 quick things as I was listening to Joe. He mentioned the number 13. And I think there's a number 13 in California politics that has absolutely the idea that we froze certain property tax rates to 1970s rate and deprived ourselves of literally tens of billions of dollars that should be going to different places, as well as we disincented residential housing creation at the expense of commercialization and commercial strip mall development. So that's sort of a big topic. Your question was, what other places do we have models to look at? And I'll mention a rather strange, but I think an interesting place to look at, which is the state of Utah. State of Utah, very different from California, but they have employed a very simple model that has been remarkably effective at reducing homelessness, and that is the idea of housing first, and I think you heard about it on the film. But we spend an incredible amount of money helping people once they have become chronically homeless, exposed to the elements, circling in and out of very expensive emergency care rooms, mental health services, jail health services, on a very expensive healthcare system, spending oftentimes $2,000 to $3,000 a month for chronically ill individuals on, say, our medical system. What Housing First is about spending money to put a roof over someone's head before they become sick. And when you do that in that preventive way, you not only are putting a roof over someone's head, it's more effective, it's more humane, it is cheaper, and it takes people off the streets. And yet we still spend many times more dollars dealing with those very expensive emergency room type healthcare costs. So we actually have a bill moving through the process to do this year. It's a bill that was vetoed by Governor Jerry Brown last year. So I think one of the things I'm trying to put out there is political involvement on these issues matter. because my colleagues, we need to hear from you. We need engagement. We need you to tell us loudly and clearly what you want so that my colleagues and our governor knows it.
All right, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but it's been a very, very wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for coming out here. I want to thank our panel for donating their time and expertise, including David Chiu, Sam Dodge, Kelly Cutler, Joe Wilson, Leon Winston, and Sherilyn Adams. So a big question that's been asked as well is our call to action for each one of you in our audience this evening is to encourage you to get involved with OFA preferably, but if another organization that speaks to you personally. This program has been generously supported by Organizing for Action Chicago, San Francisco, and the East Bay. And we would like to thank our audience here and audience online. My name is Lila Harmon. This has been a discussion beyond homelessness, a deeper discussion. Thank you so much for coming out. Good night.